Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Yeah, I was really laughing about your screen. This is always happened during QA events, so it's so funny.
Oh man, I will tell you, I've seen a connection. I work in QA, and I always look for connections. And I'm going to put the blame here on a small company you may not have heard of it called Microsoft. This morning, I'm looking at my system, and it's got a little red dot saying, "Hey, we've got some updates for you." And I'm like, "Oh boy, things never quite go right when there's an update waiting." I was 30 minutes in prepared and everything. So now what I got to do, I got to go out and buy myself a camera as a backup. So I will never be in this situation again. Alex, why don't you introduce yourself, give us a little background, and if you've got a screen to share, why don't you do that? And then I'll let go on ahead and take over.
Yeah, I think actually we can start. So, yeah, we can show my screen and I will tell a little bit later about myself also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So,
You're great.
yeah,
Perfect.
so hello everybody. I'm really glad to see you today, and I'm going to discuss very interesting topic: 10 best practices for building web applications, test automation from the scratch. And as it's like we have a lot of information for today, and I hope we will be in time. So let's start. So my name is Pshe, and yeah, I'm QA automation expert. So I personally built test automation from the scratch in more than 50 projects for different web applications. So actually, this guide will be developed definitely based on my previous experience. And also, I'm really big fan of quality assurance, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm always willing to share my knowledge with our people also. So yeah, you can scan a QR code here if you want to follow my social media. Yeah, you are always welcome. So coming back to our topic today, imagine the situation. For example, you just joined the team and your task is to build from the scratch test automation for web application. So I think I can assume that you will face a lot of different, quite complicated questions, like how to choose the tool, how to lay down scalability. It's really difficult question. How to build perfect test architecture, how to prepare test data, which programming language to use for backend test automation, for front-end test automation, and how invest into your test stability, because we know that it's one of the most important parts of a test in general. And yeah, like a lot of different questions. Normally, we don't know where to start, and it's very obvious because most of these things you can know only from your previous experience. So that's why I think it's so important to share my experience here with you. And yeah, I prepared the guide with 10 best practices, and we will go with this particular plan. So we will discuss problem, we will discuss after best practice, and after some like steps how to introduce this best practice into your project. Yeah, and I try to do it very like how to say, like I try to prepare some real advices, not like very general advices, but real steps, like what you need to do in your particular project to start today. So if you need to build web application, Autodesk from scratch, you just open this guide and follow it. And yeah, I hope you are ready. So let's start. The first, the biggest problem which I faced is testability. And unfortunately, it's not the thing that like our QA think a lot about, and how usually it looks. We rush to create a lot of new autotests from the beginning without analysis, without scalability points, just like to create auto tests as many as possible directly from the beginning. And our application doesn't deploy in isolation. So it means we cannot run our application locally, for example, and that's why, of course, we cannot run our application in a continuous integration system. So as a result, actually, tests are totally useless, because if we cannot to get the test result or the test status on the particular commit or merge request or pull request, it means actually we have tests, but they are isolated from the whole project, and the status of this test doesn't affect at all our delivery process. So it's a problem. And what is the best practice? So very simple, but sometimes it requires really a lot of resources from different departments, but we should set up CI/CD and test coverage from the beginning. Like, okay, test coverage can be like 0 or 1%. It's okay. We will increase it step by step in future, but we must set up it from the beginning. It's just like statement. We should do it. And the solution, how we can do it, we should invest time in deploying the application locally. It's the first step always. Like we should, for example, run one bash script or one command in terminal, and after that, our application can be deployed in our local machine. After that, we will catch lack of infrastructure or test endpoints. For example, here and here we can set up data only manually. And of course, in this case, we cannot automate it. So we should create new test endpoints. We should ask developers to add some additional information in the code for testing purposes. And as a final step, bash script for launching. So we set up a CI/CD pipeline with this bash script after. So it's our first problem and what we should do with it. The next problem is the lack of analysis of the entire testing pyramid from the beginning. So when we, for example, choosing a programming language for backend and front-end tests, when we deciding whatever to store tests with our product code or not, or separately in another repository, or when we decided how to create our test cases, I mean, like how to decompose them on different levels of testing pyramid, on API level, on UI level, or maybe some of these tests can be introduced in unit testing level. So as a result, we can have inefficient testing. And how we can solve this problem? So of course, we must think about reusing structures at each level of testing. So what I mean, first of all, we should choose as a programming language, backend programming language. Actually, we can have different strategies, and in general, usually it's 3 different strategies. When we have backend programming language the same as the programming language for tests, front-end programming language the same as the programming language for tests, or also it can be 2 different programming languages for tests on backend and front-end side. So based on my personal experience, the best solution in terms of reusing existing code is to choose for test the programming language of backend. Why? Because in this case, we can reuse all necessary code, like data classes for API, like API requests from our product code. And also we can do it if we store our tests in the same repository with our product code. And after that, we can cover all user flows at the API level. And also on the UI level, we will check not all user flows, but only the integration between API and UI. Why it will work? Just because we guarantee that all user flows are working, because we already tested it on API level. So for UI, everything we need actually is just to test integration between UI and API, and that's all. So yeah, it's our solution based on my overall experience. The next problem is scalability points. And why it's problem? Because before, when we just started, we don't analyze at all endpoints and how it will expand in the future. But it's quite important because based on this, we can predict some scalability points in our project. So when new functionality appears, test framework needs to be fundamentally rewritten. So it means like we should create everything from the scratch, and sometimes we should change all previous classes and maybe even start from the scratch again. So we have a really big absence of any scalability, and that's our problem. So how we can solve it? We can analyze all the functionality together and plan a scalable test architecture before. So how we can do it exactly? So we should analyze all endpoints and web pages and find patterns. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time here today, but maybe next time I will show you on examples how you can do it. But basically, it's about like, for example, we notice that for every endpoint, we will always create four methods like CRUD, create, delete, update, and read. And in this case, we can say like, okay, we can create some interface which will require all new requests to implement all these methods. So we can find some patterns, and we can use like design patterns or also some features from programming language to support these patterns, and also to write a framework that requires to follow these patterns. Like, for example, if I just joined the project and I decided to create new test, I must implement all these like patterns, all these methods, because it's interface, and based on language, for example, in Java, you must implement your interface methods. So yeah, it means like your framework kind of explain how to write new tests, and all these patterns contains these scalability points. So I hope the idea is like clear here. And the next problem, which also we can face a lot, it's a test data problem. So what I mean here, for example, we have hard-coded test data in each test, or not in each test, but sometimes we have some hard-coded data. And first of all, the problem is that we have this paradox, which explain us that if we use the same data for each new test, in this case, finally, test will not catch any new bugs. So we know probably this rule. Yeah, but also another problem, and more maybe even a more important problem, is that we will have in this case a lot of data conflicts and also inconsistency of our environments. And it will lead finally to test instability. So as you know, probably stability of tests is one of the most important criteria for our tests, because otherwise it became like expensive, and like it became pretty inefficient. So how we can solve this problem? We should generate any test data, and maybe it sounds a little bit unrealistic, but actually it's possible. You just have to invest enough time from the beginning to build infrastructure to do it on the fly, and that's all. And what can be the possible solution for such approach? So first of all, you can build all test data based on data classes. I think it's already very well known best practice, and everyone does it. So yeah, it's the first step. After that, you can do some automatic generator for all data classes. What does it mean? With different programming languages, you can create such structure. I provide you the name of data class, and you provide me as a result, as a response, this data class, the object of this data class, with all generated data based on types, based on maybe some other heuristics, like, I don't know, maybe if it's street, it should be a real street name. If it's name, it should be real name. We have enough different fakers and data generators, and we can do it technically. It's not a problem. So we should invest our time to generate our data from the beginning, and not generate it in custom way, like for every data class, but to create some common way for generation based on the type of data class. So it's possible, and I really recommend you to invest time into this process. So, and after that, we can modify test specific data. I mean, the data that we need for a particular test case inside this test case on the top of this generated data. So we generate everything, and after that, we can say, okay, in this test case, I'm going to test the project name. That's why here I'm going to override existing project name with this new value. And after that, I will test like that created project name really has this value. So it will be very readable. I mean, in terms you can open a test case and you can see that you not like write a lot of different lines of code for generating the data which are you not gonna to test in this particular test case. But you just generate this name or set this name to the generated class, and after that you test it, and it's pretty clear. So it's really good practice, and I can recommend you to follow it. And the next problem is isolation. So this problem is about, for example, let's imagine the situation. We have different test data, as you just mentioned. This test data can be sometimes from a test environment. Sometimes we have special scripts, bash scripts, to set up some data in database or in our sources. And for example, also it's popular situation when we don't have users and we use existing users from test stand. So for example, we use part of data from test stand, also some data maybe from the previous step. In previous step, we generate data, and we are going to use the same data in the current test, or manually add this test into database. And the problem is that when the data is lost for some reason, the test obviously fails. And yeah, it's like we can see that we have a big lack of isolation here, because every test cannot like run independent. And that's why it's really important that all tests create and clean up its own test data. So, and we create not like some part of data, but actually we create everything from the scratch in every test. And yeah, you can say like, okay, we don't have endpoint for user generation, or we don't have functionality to generate this part of our application. So yeah, that's why we are talking about these important steps from the beginning. So it's actually our work to find this lack of test endpoints, maybe some our functionality for testing purposes, and highlight it, and like really try to invest our time and effort to be sure that all this functionality will be implemented to help us to test it correctly in the future. And yeah, so how we can do it? First of all, we can create all API data classes, or as I already mentioned, if we store our if we store our tests next to code repository, we can directly reuse it from the code, because as you remember, we decided to choose backend programming language, so we can just reuse it. And also, several times I highlighted that it should be in one repository, but actually, yeah, if we dive into technical details, it's not necessary to store it in one repository, because we can always use as a Git submodule these tests from another repository, or maybe as a library. So we have technical solutions to do it. So we can create all API data classes or reuse it. And after, we can create general generator based on the model which we already mentioned in the previous step, right? And after that, this generator remember all created models and clean up them at the end. So what does it mean? So we create such functionality where we, in the beginning of each test, we generate all possible test data. And we also keep this information, which test data we generated. And after that, in the end, we just use this storage, which already saved all this information. And we say like, okay, right now it's time to clean up it. So just clean up it. Yeah, and that's why we have also, it's also, we can say, scalability point here, because yeah, we can add new data classes for API, yes, and it will work. It will work automatically. So again, we will remember this information and we will clean up it in the end. So yeah, that's basically it. The next problem that we have, and we slightly move into more like UI problems, other than API. So it's remote run. So for example, it's also quite popular problem, especially for beginners. We run tests on a local browser. Yeah, okay, we can do it maybe for in the beginning for our local tests, but I would recommend to start from remote run from the beginning. So, or we have browser that we store nearby in some folder, like browsers folder, some files which can run browser on our local machine. Or we have some special custom logic, like how, in which case we can use Firefox, in which case we can use Chrome, different browsers. But the problem is that it's not scalable solution at all. It's not maintainable solution, or we can maintain it, but it will be really expensive for us. And it's also not configurable solution. So what we can do here, as I already said, my main advice would be like always use remote browser farm from the beginning. Even when you test just locally your application, because you will catch a lot of problems which are depend on your environment. For example, you spend your time, you just debug your test, everything is green right now, and after that your test will appear in CI/CD pipeline, and you just notice that everything is red for some reason. But in case if you have the same remote browser farm on your local machine, on your colleague machine, and also maybe in CI/CD, so in this case, you can be quite sure that you have absolutely the same environment everywhere. And of course, it will save your time. So what solution can be here? First of all, I suggest you set up a remote browser farm and remote execution. You can use Selenoid for it, or Selenium Hub, a lot of different solutions. I prefer Selenoid. After that, you can add the UI interface and the artifact collection. So for example, in Selenoid, you have Selenoid UI, so you can always see what's going on right now with your test. And also you can collect very quite simple logic. You can collect videos, you can collect all screenshots, all DOM file, HTML, everything, all information that you need to debug your test. And after that, you can configure also browser versions and our settings, and it's based on configuration files. So it means you can always change it on the fly, but it's also pretty convenient for maintenance. Okay, so the next problem also related to UI tests. Of course, it's locators, and I think you are quite familiar with this problem. So yeah, I think you know that often in projects, locators are constantly changing, and it's quite challenging task for QA assurance engineers to be sure that UI tests are really stable. Also, sometimes structure of a DOM file changes. Or another problem, like for the next level, when identical elements have different locators, so we cannot find them as a collection. And of course, all of these situations lead to the instability and high cost of maintaining UI tests. So yeah, what can I suggest here? Actually, quite basic, but I think the best decision here is to follow one rule. Like if there is no data test attributes on the element, it means we don't have element. And these rules is not only for QA engineers and mostly not for QA engineers. Of course, it's mostly for developers. So how we can do it? First of all, create an invariant. Like we can work only with this particular statement with developers, but every element has a test data attribute, and every collection of element has the same test data attribute. So it's just the rule, and we must follow it because we, all of us, as a development team, we want to create as stable, as efficient, as useful tests as possible. So it's our mission. So let's try to do it. And also, in tests, we should search for element only by attributes, like not by tag, text, or something, just only attribute, that's all. Or in our situation when we, okay, for example, we don't have attribute, in this case, we should find the part of element which should never change and use only this part. It's possible also, and technically it's also possible. With XPath, with CSS, it's possible. So yeah, and finally be strict and demanding for the sake of testability. So yeah, here we should really like try to spread this information as a rule, as a culture. Yeah, I hope yeah, it's clear. So the next problem also with our UI tests related to using page object and maybe less well known but page element. So what is the problem? We describe web elements in different places. So we don't use some general structures for identical elements. Like for example, we have element of article on the page, and we can use it as a page element. Actually, we can describe it with some like data class or just class, and we can reuse this functionality in all possible ways. Or part of the web elements sometimes is found inside tests when we try to find our web element directly from the test instead of some structure like page object or page element. So as a result, we have a spaghetti code without applying basic patterns like dry, don't repeat yourself, or keys, keep it simple, right? Principles. And what can I suggest here? Also very maybe basic, maybe no, based on my experience. Not everyone follows it, but still. Simple rule. If we have web page If we have one web page, so it should be one page object class. If we have one web element, it should be one page element. So the same, we can transfer our web element collection to our object collection. Like it's actually, I would say it's just the same as we do normally with API when we serialize our JSON to some class. And it's pretty the same, but here we serialize our page or our web element to some class also. It's just the most convenient way to work with structures. So what solution we can apply here? First of all, create two parent classes like page object class, main page object class, and main page element class with all mandatory fields and methods which will be like applied for all children. So for example, in page element, it will be this web element. In page object, normally we require to implement open class, to open page. Also maybe some weightings which are applicable for all pages, some common methods. After that, implement common rules for writing classes. The same as I said before, but for API. We should require the test framework to control the writing of our tests. So it means like based on design patterns or based on the possibilities with our programming language, we should somehow to say like, okay, if you want to create new UI test, you should follow this, this, and this. Otherwise, the code will not compile. So yeah, maybe it's strict, but it works in the best way. Yeah. So about the next problem. The next problem is configuration. So, for example, we need to run tests locally or with CI/CD. It's pretty basic requirements. And also we have some specific browser to run or specific screen extension. It can be also our parameters. Or, for example, our backend URL different on different test stands or different on review app. Review app, it's when you deploy your project directly from commit. Yeah. So as a result, we must modify the code to support all this type of launching our tests. And it's a problem, yes, because we can see it's also not scalable solution. So what we can do here, the best practice is that all configurable launch parameters should be extracted to separated config file, and it can be changeable on the fly. So just basic things actually for any application, but tests is also like some framework, some project applications. So we also should support this functionality here. And how we can do it? Like, first of all, you can create some separated config class that reads the config file from any location in the program. So we can say in any location in our project, like, please use this property from config file. And after that, you can extract all launch parameters settings to this file. What it can be, for example, it can be product version, backend, front-end version. It can be browser, mobile version, or like tablet version, screen resolution, and etc. So after that, you pass launch parameters in different CI/CD pipelines, and yeah, it's like all magic works right now, because you can set up different pipelines. You can say, okay, on this commit we run after 3 different pipelines: this one on Firefox, this one on mobile version, this one on Chrome, this one for this backend version, this one for this backend version. So it's very, very scalable. Yeah. And our actually last problem, but not least, I think one of the most important, is test documentation problem. So also the popular situation is that tests are not described anywhere at all, or it described manually in some document. So you can assume probably, so it's quite difficult to maintain in this case this document, because tests, especially in the beginning, they like change very fast, and nobody knows the real status of the tests. So finally, again, we have the problem that tests are useless and inefficient. Yeah, and we try to avoid this situation. So what can we do here? Pretty also basic solution, but it's also must have. We cannot avoid it. So all tests should be or must be self-documenting on the fly. Yeah, because it's auto test and it's technically possible. So we shouldn't spend our time for maintaining some like kind of the same, absolutely the same document, but manually. So, of course, we should invest our resources into this process. And how we can do it? First of all, we should set up a general test report for the tests. We have enough tools for it. Probably the most popular right now is Allure. Also, we can implement an automatic solution for describing all methods. So what does it mean? In all test cases, we use the same methods, some basic methods for API or for UI tests. So we should create some proxy which will automatically describe all these methods or parameters which we use, and to add it directly to the report. So after that, we should generate this test report for each test run. So it should be a part of this pipeline with testing, right? And we should store its history. Normally it's like advanced level, but I think we can do it technically. It's not so difficult. So we should also invest our time, because in this case, we can get so many new insights, like about the difference in time execution, difference how like in terms of course flackiness. So we can see all our problems like very transparent in this case. So that's why I think it's really important to invest our time into test documentation. So yeah, it was actually a last problem that I would like to mention. And my main takeaway from this talk is that, first of all, reuse our experience. It's really efficient, and moreover, if you have something to share with our QA, also share yours, because I would like to see more and more our experience, and I would like also to steal something from you. So yeah, if you were looking for inspiration, it's it's your time. Yeah, thank you so much. You can find the slides from this presentation on this QR code. And if you have any question, I'm ready to answer. Thank you so much.
Looks like we have a couple of questions in the list over here. And not only that, we have some spare time. So we've got probably about 20 minutes to fill on some cool stuff. So I'm going to remind everybody, if you have questions for Alex on anything she asked about, please feel free to put them into the chat in YouTube if you're watching there, or there's also a chat here on the live restream studio, I believe. Restream, where you can, if you're watching it from LinkedIn, you can ask questions over there and throw them in. Please, as I always say, the only dumb question is the one you didn't ask. So throw anything you like over here. Either me or Alex can certainly take a handle at it. Alex, I'm going to go scroll back over here to one of the beginning ones here. We have an anonymous LinkedIn user has asked, how do you prepare data for API tests? Are you using stubs or are you using real data? How do you solve this issue when working with microservices when there is a change on the back end in several services? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's quite a popular question. Yes, so if we are talking about just one service, it's pretty simple. So as I said, we have always some requirements in terms of type for each field. If we are talking about JSON, for example, as a request body for API. So in this case, it's quite simple. We can prepare random data based on type of field. If we are talking about more difficult case in terms of testing several microservices and the integration between them, so in this case, the first layer is to be sure that everything is working on in one particular microservice. And yes, if we test something which is inside this microservice, we can totally generate this data as real data. But if we are waiting for response from another microservice, so in this case, during the testing in one particular microservice, of course, we're using mocks and stubs. So we kind of like pretend when we we receive some response, but actually, yes, we don't receive. And on the next level, we invest our time in a specific like integrational test. And in this case, yes, we should really like try to call real methods from another microservice, and after that we will check this integration. But it should be separated tests, because in this case, if it will be together, I don't know, in one suite, in this case it will be quite difficult uh, to find the reason why it doesn't work. So yeah, it should be different suites, different layers of testing.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much, Alex. I'll throw in a little bit my 2 cents as well, asking about if you're using stubs or using real data. There is always concern on most of my clients whether you can use real data, because there is PII, personal information, that is concerning. You can generate sample data. As Alex mentioned, there is Faker. Faker is um, a library out there that allows you to generate fake information. By the way, I believe it is community-faker. There's a story you can Google about Faker 666, which was a very weird story. I can't get into it right now, but community-faker is an awesome node package out there for doing stuff like that. I also did mention that there is for creating other types of fake data. There is by the guy who created the selectors hub. There is a test data creation tool for finding for generating data. And of course, right now my scroll bar isn't going to go show me that. Here it is. It's called Auto Test Data. If you want to go check that out, autotestdata.com. Um, the other thing I always mention about what data, which is because that's a great question that they come up with, are you using real data or not? One of the most important things I always say is go talk to your service, the actual people who are using your tool, and try to get some of the data from them, because they may know about weird things that you don't know about, you never think about as a tester. It's a great resource. One example I usually give is, what if Pshe breaks her arm, gets checked into a hospital, and Alex, I don't know if you know Pshe, the American singer out here. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
that's
just listened today.
okay. The interesting thing is her stage name has a dollar sign in it. So if you have someone who's like, oh, I know Pshe, KE $SHA, is it going to go through the database? Is it going to get kicked out? Is it going to cause problems? That's a great way, to start keeping track of data that might be problematic. And the best way to get that is from your actual users who are using your software to do that. Let me see what's our next one here. We had a thing over here from Roman. Uh, Roman was teasing me a little bit about me being so old that I'm mentioning QTP, UFT, which is fine. I actually had a job interview just a week ago about it, first one in 6 years. So Roman, yeah, it's not all that popular anymore. But Roman says, if new functionality is implemented in the app and after is needed to be rewrite the entire test automation solution, probably it's not so good a solution. I'm not sure what Roman was referring over there, but I think it had to do with you're talking about reusability of code and being a little bit adaptable. Is there uh, uh, anything you could speak to that about how do you handle new functionality gets implemented in the application?
Yeah, actually, as I mentioned in my talk, that I always try to predict how we're gonna to extend our product in future. And normally we have some plan at least for half of year, so I can always, as I said, to prepare this scalability point from the beginning. And also, I think it's much more easy if we have some like in general development culture in the team, and also we can follow some best practices not only in test automation but in general with our product code also. In this case, the probability of situation when something happens and we cannot support it in our test framework quite low, I would say. So yeah, of course it, like sometimes it happens when yeah, we just have absolutely new functionality and no one expected it, but I would say it's quite rare situation. So yeah, just as I mentioned, yeah, it's quite difficult. I think you should practice more if you want to. It's like these tasks during the interviews with algorithms and the data structures, when you should try to solve as many lead code problems as possible to achieve this level, like to prepare algorithms which are scalable. The same here, just try to write down all possible your classes, all possible endpoints, data, tests you're gonna to cover, and after that try to think how you can generalize it, how you can create really elegant like solution for it.
Great. Okay, another question here, and we've got testing and tooling out there who's been doing some great stuff, asking questions here. They're asking, how do you maintain the test history report in your current project?
Yeah, I think it's should be delegate to your CI/CD pipeline. So if you use GitHub Actions or GitLab, you can host your reports and test history directly in Page. So if I talk about Allure, Allure has a special functionality to keep your history. If you use something more custom, you also can create the like common dashboard for showing all historical data. Yeah, so I think it should be a part of pipeline and it should be open automatically after pipeline is finished.
Yeah, testing and tooling, I will agree with that as well. With Alex, I've had the same experience where we've got Jenkins jobs where we've run multiple jobs, and the Allure report will actually keep the history. There's a little tweak to that. I'm trying to remember it. I don't think I'm going to come up with it off the top of my head. I'm sure it's Googleable, or you can ask Copilot, ChatGPT will
I
tell
can
you.
say you before it was like you should add your previous report to the history folder manually,
Yes,
and that's all.
it can be automated now. You have Alex has the exact correct answer. I did it 2 weeks ago and I couldn't remember what was the issue there. She's absolutely right, and you can actually code that into your into the Java, not Java, the script inside of Jenkins in order to have it copy the history in and then start building it. I found it great. The only problem I had was when I want to go back, like it'll show me a history of like 45 runs, but it only actually saves the last 10. And I'm like trying to click on something. Look, it used to do that. Oh, it's gone. Because I mean, there is a space limitation on that.
Yeah, so backups.
Backups. Tessie and Julie, that is a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. We got Tomas, who's asking, where were you in the case where I'm trying to get these words in the right order here. Where you in the case where you put those front end IDs?
Yeah, I got. So yeah, sometimes you can be responsible for maintenance of data test attributes on front end part. Yes. um, yeah, I was in this situation several times when I was so impatient. Like I asked to add these data attributes, and I was waiting for several weeks. I'm like, come on, it's just two simple lines, and I was like, okay, I will learn how to do it by myself. So yeah, it's quite a good skill to know how to do it. Yes, but actually, a lot of frameworks they generates it automatically, so you don't need to support it. Yeah.
I think what we're talking about, like the data QA, is like a tag that's attached to elements, and then that's generally made to be a static uh, descriptor, so that you don't have to go through ID and other stuff. Am I correct, or am I totally off
Yeah,
base?
yeah, it's like special attributes that can help you to achieve stability of UI tests. Like as I said, this rule, like if you don't have data attribute, it means you don't have element. So yeah.
And the best way to get that done is make friends with your developers. Bring them a pizza every once in a while. You'll be amazed at how much cooperation you'll get from that on that. My last project I worked on was the very first one I walked in. The first thing the developer says is, "We put in data QA on everything, and if there's anything you need, just write up a Jira ticket. We will put it in there." I'm like, "This is fantastic." It made the job so much easier on that. Let's see. Still got about a few more minutes here. Alexei says, you told that tests should generate and clean up the data. What do you think about clean up only before tests execute and leave everything in the system after tests run, so we can investigate manually any test failures without any test reruns, i.e., we can launch to account and see if something is really broken there, and what can we do? Thanks.
Yeah, it's quite popular approach, clean up data not after test but before test, because also like if we clean up it after test, we don't guarantee that when we start new test, we don't know what's happened after that with this environment. So yeah, we can use also and before test and after test and everywhere where is possible. But this case, I would say that yeah, of course, we can try to use data from environment to find the root cause of a bug or of a test failure. But I think the best approach is to collect enough artifacts during the test in your test report to be able to do it only or also without this information from environment. But in general, yes, that's also a good approach. Like the main takeaway is that you just have to clean up data. Yes.
I'm going to also jump in there and say that I've applied this a very similar thing, and I'm going to have to tell Roman this goes back to my QTP UFT days, where I was actually forcing the system to leave the browser open, because it would just basically, something would crash, and then the browser would close, and I'm like, well, what was the last thing I was looking at? And I changed my framework, so I would say, okay, just leave the browser open so we can look at it, and then when we would start the next test, then it would go and say, hey, any of these browsers that got thrown up, clear them all out, in a similar vein as clearing out your data as well. Great answer, Alex. Thank you very much. Let's see. Roman says, great point about the flexibility to get info on the roadmap for the product, but sometimes it's good now to get the historical reasons why the functional is needed to update the refactor. I'm going to ask our background uh, our moderator. You don't have to bring up my camera. It's still broken. It's still going to just be a black screen. So there's no point. But we'll switch over. By the way, we do have our next speaker waiting in our green room, and she'll be up in just a minute. It is rating back there, so I'm happy to say that. But we're going to continue on a few more questions over here. Ron was asking, do you use Open API Code Gen for working with APIs? I've never heard of that, but Alex?
Is it about test generation based on Swagger or not? Yes, API. Probably it's code generation based on Swagger, right? I think I tried it, and I think it was quite expressive. But only one thing, what I was concerned about is it's good thing when you have, for example, Swagger, and you have to create your first cases. Yes, but it's quite difficult to support it when you already have your firstly generated test cases. I mean API tests, and after that you have some change in your Swagger and how this tool is going to update your tests. So I think it's the most difficult part, and for me also, as a person who tried to develop different tools for QA, I also thinking about it. It's difficult task actually, I mean technically.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay, cool. Let me see what else we got over here. If you, this is from an anonymous LinkedIn user again. If you've joined a team and have been creating and adding locators over the years beforehand, what would you do or say to suggest to rectify this moving forward?
you mean that we have unstable locators and we want to follow best practices, but we have like this old-fashioned way, right? And we should to deal somehow with that, right?
I believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's in general quite like long answer. I mean, like yeah, it's difficult to convince people to apply some change to their work. That's true. So you should somehow to express why it's really important and how it will affect the general product quality and as a result the business goals. So if you can do it, yes, in this case, yeah, you will achieve it. But basically normally, like yeah, you should explain how efficient and how useful for us as a development team can be UI tests if they are stable, if also it's like maintainable, and how much money we will spend if it's unstable. Just basic calculation. You can also show it to your manager or who, the person who are responsible for budget for the team, and yeah, I think after after all these calculations, everyone will be sure that we need to introduce this locator approach as fast as possible.
Okay. I see Romans basically as responding, it's possible to regenerate on the fly before compilation, I believe is referring to those locators. I'm going to agree with Roman. In fact, I'm going to do a little pitch. I wish my camera was working, but I did write a book with Larry Goddard, who is our other host every other day. It's an enhanced test automation with WebDriver IO. One of our chapters actually talks about how to write self-healing elements, where if your object property changes or the object type, let's say it was a link in the last release and it's now become a button, its class has changed, that you can take one or two or three shots at trying to get it to reduce your maintenance about 50 to 80%. Beyond that, you have to go in there and just change it by hand, unfortunately. But I'd say 50 to 80% less maintenance is kind of cool. And I'm sure, Alex, you probably do something similar in your projects as well. We've got the biggest trick question of ever from Maruda. This is going to be our last question over here. We got about 3 minutes to cover it. Trick question: how do you measure automation test coverage? Alex, you take it away.
Yeah, a great question. Yes, perfect question. Yeah, so for unit tests, pretty simple, right? Per branch, per line, different ways. Uh, for API tests, a little bit more interesting. We have several tools which are quite like not really popular, but you can measure your coverage per endpoint. For example, it's for rest assured, it's rest assured coverage or something like that. Yeah, you can find this repository in GitHub. It's really cool tool. So it will show you how many get parameters you cover, how many possible status codes you cover for negative tests, and everything is based on Swagger. So if you have Swagger, you can get your test coverage after test execution of API tests, and that's really cool. I found a lot of different lack of coverage based on these tools. So yeah, I can recommend it. And for UI tests, much more difficult question, because in general we don't have, or maybe I don't know, really good tools for analyzing test coverage, basically just because it depends. Like in API, we have Swagger, so we have like requirements, and it's in a specified format. So for UI, normally we don't have special format, or it depends on the company. So it's more difficult. We should create our custom solutions, how to read, first of all, requirements. It can be some diagrams, it can be user maps, it can be different things, or maybe checklists. And after that, we should find some way to trace our auto tests and these requirements. So it's really custom solutions. And I wish one day I will develop such tool to do it. It's actually my quite big dream. So I hope one day I will do it. Yes,
Go
but
for it.
my
Yeah.
initial idea, yes, was to do it based on user maps. I think it's the best way.
Okay. I highly recommend everybody go check out Swagger. If you don't have Swagger, get it up there because it is so hard to go and keep track of your all your endpoints and what's available, what data needs to be passed back and forth, and what your expected stuff is. If you don't have it in one central location checked out, and um, life is so much easier when you've got Swagger out there. So that's cool. For me, I'm going to tell you UI coverage. First of all, I never get beyond 80, 90% of coverage. I look at whatever manual test cases I cover and how many of those have been automated. I can also track by requirement. The one thing that always scares me is when a manager says, okay, well, in your spare time, automate 100% of the test cases and let me know when you're done, hopefully by the end of the month. And I'm like, that is impossible. Alex, I gotta say thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. We're gonna have you back sometime in the future. This has been a great presentation. I wish you the best of luck and everything going forward into the new year. And thank you for being on the show here.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. And yeah, it was really great to talk here. Yes.